Good afternoon, everyone. I call this May 8th, 2025, City of Jacksonville Water and Sewer Advisory Board Committee to order. Mr. Vice, do we have a quorum?
Yes, we have a quorum.
Has everyone had a chance to review the agenda items?
Yes.
Are there any discussions? Hearing none, I will accept the motion to adopt the agenda.
I'll make a motion, we accept the minutes.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Has everyone had a chance to review the last meeting's minutes? Any omissions or corrections? Hearing none, I accept the motion to accept the minutes as written.
Move approval.
Second.
Second.
All in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. Minutes approved. Okay. Looks like now I'll be handing over to Wally.
Good evening. At your last meeting, you asked to have a presentation from finance. So Sabrina, our finance director, is here tonight to give you an overview of the water and sewer fund. So with that, I'm just going to turn it over to her because she knows way more about it than I do.
So tonight, I just wanted to come and do first of all, thank you for having me, do a brief discussion on the budget and then a recap of the water sewer rate model, which I think we talked about back in January or maybe February. But so for our FY26 budget, of course, we're looking at the fiscal year that runs from July 1st, 2025 to June 30th, 2026. And this isn't specific to just the water sewer fund, but our city's overall budget. We have a North Carolina law that requires adoption, of a balanced budget by June 30th, 2025, which we'll go over the calendar in a moment, but we plan to have that adopted this month. We have a tax rate for FY26, just again, not specific to water sewer, not related at all to water sewer, but just for the general public, the tax rate for FY26 remains unchanged at 60 cents. And then water and sewer rate increase, we do have the proposed 2.25% increase, which we talk about every year when we do the rate model. And then on the utility bills as well, although again, not a part of the water sewer fund, we have a proposed recycling and residential sanitation rate increase of $4. So it will impact the utility bills.
Is the 2.25 on the base water and sewer rates?
Yes, it is across the board. It's on the base rate and the volume.
A little question on that too. I know it's going to be hard to predict, but the new tariffs and stuff that are coming out, isn't that going to make the cost of doing business higher? And is that going to cover it? I guess is my question. I know you can't say yes because you don't know what it is yet, but.
We don't know what it is, and I'm sure that it will impact especially material costs.
Exactly.
And we've talked about chemical costs before. You know, one of our chemicals last year, we saw an increase of 65%. So we know that's going to be a challenge that we're facing. I don't know how you predict, but we do at least escalate those costs over time, which Sabrina will talk about.
And we do, actually, I just had a meeting with Fleet this week, so, vehicles, we're already getting calls that, hey, we're expecting an increase because there could be tariffs even though there's not tariffs yet. They're going to go ahead and increase ahead of time, and then if there's not tariffs, then I guess so well. But so we do anticipate some increases, but we'll talk about that a little bit more as we get into the rate model. But this is the proposed budget schedule, which I don't anticipate changing. We presented the budget to council on April 8th. We posted it on the website and at the library and the clerk's office as required by law. We held a public hearing on April 22nd, which we had no comments at the public hearing. We've continued to have budget workshops after that. I think this year we did the public hearing a little bit earlier and then some budget workshops after. So that way, hopefully if anyone did come to the public hearing, we could discuss those topics. But since we didn't have anything on May 6th, we had just a brief presentation, very similar to this one actually. And then on May 20th, we will ask council to consider adoption of the budget. So focus now specifically on water sewer expenditures. The water sewer fund, these are the expenditures in the FY26 budget, and it shows you where we are with the FY25 amended budget. So in just the water and sewer fund itself, you can see that there's a significant difference between the FY25 amended and the proposed budget, which would be related to the big sewer project. And then on the capital projects and grants, again, related to grants and capital projects, a bit of a difference there. But for FY25, we had $67 million expenditures, and for FY26, $37 million. So significantly lower, but less in capital projects and grant funding. And then for the revenues, charges for service, the $26 million as opposed to $27 million, which would be the 2.25% that we're budgeting.
I'm sorry, could you explain the charges for services? What services?
Water and sewer.
Just water and
That's it.
sewer, okay.
It's water and sewer. It is water, sewer, inflow, infiltration, so it's the fees that are on your utility bills, user fees.
Thank you.
And then we have some non-operating revenues, which would be this is mostly investment earnings. There is a chunk that are related to the lease, the water towers, the leases on the water towers, and things of that nature. But it's revenues that aren't user fees. And this is broken down like this because that's how the financial statements look. So if you were ever to look at the annual financial statement, it would be broken down very similarly. That's hard to say. Appropriated fund balance for FY25 amended, you see 14 million, and then proposed $3 million. And again, the reason for that big increase is that we used a portion of the fund balance in FY25 to fund the sewer project when we moved the ARPA funding out of that project. Or no, we used it to fund, it was related to that, but when we did phase 3, I don't know if that's the official name, but when we did phase 3, we needed some additional funding. So we, rather than do an additional revenue bond and take more debt since the fund balance could sustain it, we used fund balance for that. And then other budgetary appropriations, 23 million for FY25 and for FY26 down to 3 million. This is a tricky category to explain because it's accounting stuff, because we do a lot of internal transfers between funds and capital projects, and that's sort of where that all shows up. And anytime we borrow money, like revenue bonds or installment financing, it all goes into that category. Again, if you look at the financial statements, the category is other budgetary appropriations, and it's broken down a little bit more there, but that's an overall summary of that. And again, it matches the expenditure, so we have a balanced budget, so however much expenditures you have, that's how much revenue that you have to have as well. So if you don't have the revenue and charges for service and non-operating revenues, then you're going to have to make up that revenue with either a fund balance or borrowing or transfers.
So were there bonds issued last year?
Yes, we issued some bonds in FY25 for
It was
phase
associated with,
2.
yes, it was associated with the Western Regional Sewer System Project, which is the sewer project she's mentioned. And I want to say it was about 4 million, but we only issued about half of what we initially had planned to. And that was largely because of the ARPA funds. And some of the, and I don't remember, I'm not a finance person, but in tracking, you'll remember we had to go, our bid for the pump station, we only had one, and it came in well over, so we added money from fund balance, which is some of that you see. And then we actually and I don't remember if it's in this budget year or the previous budget year, but we offset some funding that was associated with that project that was then removed and used in another place. So we added funding for that. So that's that project is still ongoing, so there's still some of the expenditures that you'll see. But all 3 phases were bid and awarded in last fiscal year, which is why you see those huge, the large difference in numbers. It's all associated with the Western Regional Project.
Where are impact fees?
They are in charges for services.
Yes. But I don't think they're a huge number. I want to say it's like $1 million or something.
Fine.
Yeah,
It's
I
not
don't
a large
even,
number.
yeah, it's just $1 million.
Well, I mean, when you're
And when you're
comparing
talking
it
about
to
26
30,
million, I know.
yeah.
It's always
Yeah.
funny, I say there's a big disconnect between my work finances and my personal finances.
Yes.
And I'm like, oh, it's only $4 million, but at home, I'm like, $400? You know?
Yeah.
So just, if there are no more questions from that, I'll just go straight into water sewer rate model.
Before you leave that, one thing I will say, as she's talking about the rate model, that's the intention of the 2.25% increase, though. It level, while you see major differences, it levels what we're charging for our services, right? Instead of, where you would have a big project hit, which is what happened in the late 2000s, we ended up with like a 25% increase and then a 10% increase and then another 20% increase or something 3 out of 4 years. This is what levels that, right? So you have some years where you have larger expenditures, but you've planned for that over time, which is what the model does. It levels some of that.
We're hoping that a lot of the citizens that are watching this, they see that 2.5, now they kind of like get it, they understand why we do it the way you're doing it. Because then you go to the public hearings and you don't see any comments because, okay, 2.5 kind of covers the scope of what's being spent.
That's a fact, because I know for a fact in one county not too far from here just raised theirs up 22%.
So,
I was on an email where they were talking about water purveyors across the state and what their increases are projected to be. And I want to say of the ones that sent in, I think there was about a dozen that were willing to share. Some weren't willing to share.
Right.
There were about a dozen that were willing to share. There was one lower than us that said we're not planning anything this year. Of course, I put our 2.25% out there. The next closest was 8%, 7.5 or 8. And that was one near us. So, but everybody else was double digits. There were 3 that were not double digits.
How long we been doing that now? About 10 years? Has it been?
I think it's
Close to 10 years.
I was thinking it was 8 or 9.
Yeah.
I think you started it shortly after I became director.
But that was the reason for those
Ten's
that were
close
new, why it was done, because of the high rates, instead of doing it 10 years from now, 22%.
Right.
Yep.
Everybody would have got impacted hard, so that's why it was done, and it's worked out really well. I
It
think.
has.
And so someone mentioned that the $4 waste increase is going to make it revenue.
I don't, if you look at the projection, the $4 does not make it quite whole because, we put the plan together almost 4 years ago and it was $4 over 3 years to get us to where we needed to be. But those were based on 4-year-old numbers. So if you look at the budget, we're close, but we're not quite there. But the council had a comment at actually at the last 2 meetings when they talked about budget about, that's where they would like to see that get to, is where you do something very small routinely instead of big increases. I mean, because if you think $4 on 26, that's a high percentage. Whereas if you look at, if you use the 2.25% on $26, it's more like 61 cents. So that's where again, I used this analogy earlier when we were talking internally. For somebody that's getting in and saving for retirement, if they save for the first 10 years and stop, they're better off than somebody that starts at year 11 and saves for the next 20. That little compounding over time really helps.
So waste is going to be $30?
So waste will be a total of 30 by the time you add in the disposal, yes, sir.
It's 10 when it started, I remember.
It was, but again.
It was subsidized.
That's right.
$5 million a year from the general fund, so.
Yeah, so if you go back, when we started the increase, it was, I think we were supplementing somewhere between 1.8 and $2 million. And I want to say after we did the first one, it was like 1.4. And I don't remember what it was last year.
600.
And we're somewhere at 600 is what's projected for this year, and we'll see where we are for next. So, but it's projected to be less than that.
It sounds like we need another tab for the water sewer rate model. It's all waste tab. We actually have talked about that.
Yes, we've talked about trying to develop a solid waste model very similar to our water and sewer model.
It would be it would be more simple to do because you don't have the capital projects.
That's right. It's
So-
equipment, it's just.
Right. So for the water sewer rate model, as you know, we do the model early on in the year so that we can just see where we're tracking with budget, and we make some assumptions with that. But this year, we just looked at the rate model again in the last couple of weeks, just to be sure that as we've moved through the budget discussions and the CIP getting to a point where we're at a final point with that, we haven't changed any projects or done anything that's going to impact the model. So that's what this is just an overview of that. Since we did the rate model early in the year, I will tell you that actually nothing changed in the water sewer fund, which is good. We really didn't have any changes to the budget, and the only project, we moved one project out 1 year from the beginning, the draft CIP to the proposed. So this is the exact same rate model that you've seen early on, but just to review it again for everyone. Some assumptions that we make in the model, we are very conservative with our assumptions. I always talk about that. We have our non-rate-based revenues to grow at 1% annually. That would be things like investment earnings. That you right now we're more than 1%. We hope we continue that, but everything's volatile right now, so we want to make sure that we're conservative. Expense escalation, speaking to your point about the uncertainty right now and the tariffs, we use an escalation factor of 1.5% to 5%, depending on the category. So like salaries and benefits, we do at 5%. A lot of the operating expenses are 1.5%. Contracted services are usually 3% because we know a lot of those contracts have escalation in them that are 3%. So we realize not everything will increase 1.5% every year, but some things may be more, and we feel pretty confident that we're remaining conservative on that. Hopefully, the whole tariff thing doesn't prove us
They can work for
wrong.
our benefit also. If the tariffs do work and everybody comes down and the prices level off to where it's expected, I mean, this would change also, to the lower percentage than the higher one. Because when I hear tariffs, all you're saying is that, yeah, right now it's high because of what's going on, but once it settles down and we do get lower tariffs,
Right.
that would pay for our benefits also.
That's right. And like with salaries and benefits, we know that we don't increase every part of salaries and benefits 5% every year. There's an increase in salaries, and hopefully, based on what council approves in the budget, right now we're budgeting a 5% increase between market and merit. But some things don't increase 5%. You know, health insurance may not be 5%, or it may be a little higher and something else may be a little lower, you know. So we have some, again, we're just conservative. We hope that we have enough cushion built in there. And then we, of course, use the FY26 proposed CIP with projects through 2035, and there are escalation factors built in there as well, because we know that what we think a project may cost today will likely not be the same, you know, 6 or 7 years from now. And hopefully we are using enough cost escalation. We'll revisit that as we do everything else in the model every year. So if the whole tariff thing blows up and we do the rate model in January, or we'll start working on it before then, but let's say in December and things have been crazy, then we'll know we need to increase those escalation factors a bit. As far as the panel scenarios, again, just reminding everyone that we do have a new rate model. This is the first year that we've used it, so these panels do look a little different than the green and blue ones that you saw for so many years. But this is a panel from the planned 2.25% increase that just shows the rate is the same every year, and the rate does not change based on capital needs. So to Wally's point earlier, just because you have a $20 million project one year doesn't mean that your rates all of a sudden have to go up, you know, 25%. You're keeping it level every year. While on the flip side of that, the just-in-time is what we call it. Just-in-time rate increases do change annually, and they are based on your capital needs. And those rates are calculated only to meet specific financial targets that you have in each year. So you'll see the targets in a moment, but if we have targets on debt service coverage and days of cash on hand, this particular scenario calculates what the rates would have to be just to meet those financial targets. And while we don't have any 25% rate increases right now, you can definitely see that you may not need an increase for a couple of years, but then all of a sudden in 2029, your rate spikes up to 7.4, and then again 4.5, and then you drop down a little, but then you're back up again, still above that 2.25, and then you're hit with 11% in 2033. So that, you know, back to the point of keeping those level increases and having that stability, if you set it only to meet the financial targets, you're going to get that big variation in rates. Oops, I think I went too far. So for the planned annual 2.25%, we're still meeting our financial targets in every year and exceeding them in a couple of areas. Our minimum debt service coverage is 2.09. Our minimum days of cash on hand is 484 days. We started talking about that a little bit more than our actual fund balance number, because what does a fund balance of $10 million really mean? You know, how long can you sustain the system with the cash that you have on hand? So in this scenario with the 2.25, we're at 484 days. And then your average customer bill in 2034, if you remember in the old panel, we would always show kind of where you end up to show the differences in the rates. So where you end up in this scenario is the 41.14 and 78. And
So, could you back it up? So you're saying in 34, the average, but that's just average, right?
Right.
Which is what?
6,000 gallons.
Right, okay.
Yeah.
So it would be
Minimum.
110 plus 30 plus 35, right?
So it would
Because
be
you got the-
111 plus 30 for sanitation plus 5, so 35.
Okay. But that's 6,000 gallons.
Yeah, that's 6,000 gallons. That's not the base rate.
Right.
So realizing there's quite a few graphics on this dashboard, the main intent is just to show a snapshot from the model of the financial targets. So to the right, you see that red line is the target on the debt service coverage. I know it's a little small. And then we show the average customer bill down in the left-hand corner. Those are the main things. We just want to show that where we have the target set to meet for the financials, we are exceeding that. And this screenshot also shows you just the annual debt service requirements with the proposed debt service for any borrowing that we would have in future years. Going forward, my plan is to do these individually, but this is a snapshot from the model as it is right now. Any questions on that one? I know it's very...
So the revenue bonds we did back during the expansion, have they about expired or about?
Oh, my goodness. I don't want to guess on that,
Okay.
so I'll have to look and get you the dates, because we did refinancings.
Right.
We saved a significant amount of money in doing that, and that's been fairly recent that we've done that. It feels recent to me.
Because the bond-
Time
I want to
is
say it was in the
flying.
last 5 years.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the bonds we issued aren't revenue bonds, right? They were.
Yes.
We did.
Oh, they were? Okay. Oh, well, okay.
Yeah.
But when we refinanced, I think it saved us like $1 million a year or something.
It saved a lot.
So,
And when you refinance, don't you extend the time of payment?
Yes.
So how's that save? Just
The
question.
rate is much.
Yeah, much lower than.
the rate was lower
Okay.
when we refinanced.
Significantly enough not
To make it worth it,
Okay,
yes.
All right, just my mental moraine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'll get the detail on that and we'll get it to you guys. I know we get that question a lot because it does, you know that we borrowed money a long time ago, but then we've done these refinancings and so it sort of always keeps it out there.
That may be something we can add in our WASAC report that we send out, put it in RFIs. We could probably put it in there so that you get it.
So on the just-in-time rate increases, same thing, we're meeting the financial targets each year. This is the scenario that's set for the sole purpose of doing that. So we have our minimum debt service coverage at 1.77, and our minimum days cash on hand is 365 days. And I know, recently at the council meeting, we've talked some about emergencies that can happen, and while it may seem, do we need a year's cash on hand? We all know that we can't necessarily have a savings account, where we just have money sitting, but to have cash in the fund available for an emergency is important. So it's nice to have the 484 days out there in case, tariffs do all of a sudden go way crazier than we think they're going, or we have a hurricane or some
major
other
failure.
emergency where we need that cash.
And that makes interest too, when you say sitting in the general fund.
Or city and water sewer fund, those investment earnings that we're getting that large amount of revenue annually is from that as well. That is correct.
Now, have y'all seen the hurricane forecast for this year?
I haven't.
No.
Don't look good. So I'm gonna say for us.
Doesn't ever look good.
No, this year, they predict even more to hit
More
us,
storms.
hit North Carolina.
I'm sad that I mentioned that, but I do.
Tell them what I heard.
Yeah, we do bring that up. We've talked about it some this week, but and then when you get to your average customer bill in 2034, you see that if you were to go with the just-in-time rate increases, you would have big increases, but your bill ends up higher at the end of the model, as opposed it was 41.14.
Ends up $8 more, basically.
9 years from now.
So what I find interesting from our smaller incremental increases, over a long period of time, we end up financially better off with lower bills long-term. So it really is a model that works very well. And our city engineer and I had a meeting with ASCE, which is the American Society of Civil Engineers, and they're working on, the North Carolina chapter is working on the North Carolina report card for infrastructure. And one of the things they get into is financing. And when I shared that was our model that we've followed, and we've been following that for the last 8 to 10 years, the 5 engineers that were on the call were all very shocked. And one of them had actually worked for DEQ with the state, and, he basically said that, we had recommended that model to many municipalities who've never followed it. It's interesting to see one that's following that model and having a lot of success. So it is not something that everybody does.
So again, the same graphic with the just-in-time rate increases. You see that it's the financial target, the red line is still there, but you're just meeting that, because that's what this model is designed to do. It's just designed to get you to that red line. And then to Wally's point about being $8 higher at the end, you can see that the average customer bills, if you can see that well, you can see that they are higher. And that's all. It's a very brief presentation, but it's just a quick recap of sort of the budget process and where we are right now with the schedule and the rate model and sort of how it works and how we got here.
One thing I'd like to add, we talked a little bit about cost escalations and things that we see over time. One nice thing about the model is that it's basically recalibrated every year, because we go in and we put the previous year's actual expenditures in. So just an easy example on, salaries and benefits. So if we increase that at 5% in the model, somebody may look at that and say, well, you're just forever increasing salaries and benefit at a cost of 5%. But I'll give you an exact example of what happened this year. We had 3 people in TJ's area that retired. One had 28 years with the city, one had 35, and the other had right around 30, maybe exactly 30 or 31. We replaced those with people that were with the city for 5 years or 3 years. So obviously those salary costs are now lower because you've replaced somebody that's at the end of their career with somebody that's beginning their career. So that higher salary escalated at 5% over that 10 years. Now the next year will be reset and will follow what that new salary is, because it's based on actual expenditures. Same thing, if you have an employee leave, and to compete, I'll use an engineer as an example just because it's hard to get, right? You may have to pay more to get that engineer than you were paying one that was here. So again, it could work counter to it too.
Right.
But it's at least recalibrated every year. It's not like we just take one set time and say, oh, from here forevermore, we're going to escalate 5%. It's actually recalibrated each year. So in the event that we don't increase 5%, well, then that's now recalibrated in the model. Or if you have chemicals jump up, 65%, that goes in and that's recalibrated each year. So it seems to work very well. And again, I'm not saying we won't get to a point at some point that the 2.25 may not be enough. I hope it's not while I'm here, but at least it shows over the next 10 years that our steady increases are better for our citizens and our ratepayers and makes us more financially stable.
Right.
So we have an engineer now?
We do.
Oh, okay.
Amy Kimes, she came to us from Surf City, and her husband is actually an engineer too, and he was with DOT for a long time.
Oh, wow.
So Amy's worked with Wilmington, DOT, and Surf City.
Greg left. 7 or 8 years ago.
Yeah, Greg's been gone over
6 years.
Yeah, it's longer than that. And we had Jason, if you remember, we had Jason Miles for three years or so, and then we had Nick for 2 years or so. And Nick still works with us a lot. He's still here. He's just under his own shingle now. But we have Amy Kynes, very excited about that.
I see Nick.
She's a great fit for our team.
So as the city expands and gets bigger, you'll get more revenue at the same time with the models kind of stays the same.
Right.
Because you have to.
And we do escalate. Not only do we predict accounts, but we also predict usage. So we're predicting both in our revenue model.
So I noticed the investment earnings, you've got a budgeted increase. So are you looking at having the same amount of money from year to year, or?
Was it the, let me go back. I don't know that specifically, there are other things in that, the non-operating revenue, is that what you're talking about?
No, oh, right, okay. That's what.
It's because it's investment earnings, but there are also like the water tower leases that do increase
I see.
Annually, so.
And we just renewed one for Bryn Mawr tank, which was AT&T?
Yeah.
For AT&T. And they escalate, we have some older leases out there, but as we renew them at $1,000 per post, and then they escalate 3% per year for 7 years. And then we renegotiate. So as we get people off of an older model and onto that model, you may see that. And then another place you might see a lot of fluctuation there, maybe I shouldn't make this assumption, but I'm going to make the assumption this is where it goes, is forestry management, so logging.
Good job.
So 1 year, if it's dry, we may see a lot of proceeds from logging. If it's wet, we can't log because we're having to irrigate, and we don't want the loggers tearing up the land. So wet seasons, you see less logging. Drier times, you see more. So you can see some fluctuation there also.
And I will add to what Wally said, because I actually sort of forgot about this, but, and I didn't talk about it at the council meeting either, but another good thing about this model, we did talk about the change, and before we hand keyed a lot of information into the model, but this model uses the actual we use the audited financial statements at the end of the year. So to Wally's point about actual expenditures, we did used to go in and key in the expenditures from the lines, but this is nice because it's using audited numbers, and we have the where we ended last year fund balance wise to start with. But another, I think, improvement that's happened kind of at the same time as this model is that we used to sort of stick a number in there for, vehicles and equipment, like just kind of look at what we've been spending, what we think we're going to be spending. But now our staff has worked really hard to create a 5-year equipment replacement plan, not just on vehicles, but on all capital, obviously not CIP, but all other capital expenditures, I guess, like vehicles, equipment, computers, things like that. So we're able to get a more, I don't know if I can say accurate number, because I don't, just like with the vehicles that we talked about, I don't know what those prices are going to do, but, she does work with the fleet superintendent to look at what he thinks the vehicles might be, and while it doesn't go out 10 years, they do 5, and then we can base the remaining 5 off of that. So that's another improvement in this model.
And you get your maintenance reports on those vehicles, especially the big trash trucks. 'Cause some of those guys say, yeah, we got old trucks, but we're making them work. So the longevity of that. So I know that you try to get them new trucks out there, but.
Well, we have, it's really easy to point at vehicles, but you can look at, I'll pick Main Pump Station. There's 4 pumps there. And if you look at LTS, there's 6 pumps there. If you have to replace, they're basically a motor pump combo, right? So it's an electric motor that drives the pump. If you have to replace the combo that's at LTS, so pump and motor, you're talking about $175,000. Truck's not as important, all right? We got to have the pumps and the motors. So we're even trying to get to where it's hard to predict when those will actually fail, but we're trying to get better at predicting some of those. Even a small pump costs us $5,000. So, we have 48 lift stations, all that have at least 2 pumps. So trying to predict when those will fail are a little bit harder, but we are trying to get better at plugging those things into that 5-year ERP2 so that it's as accurate as we can make it.
Thank you, Sabrina. That was very informative. Appreciate it. Thank you all. So I guess we're turning over to open discussion.
We don't really have much in open discussion. I don't have any slides for you tonight. What I'll share is that we are still working through our lead service line inventory. We're still out trying to gather those. We've identified some that are going to be challenging, primarily in commercial situations, because you have asphalt or concrete on top of both sides of the service line, and we really don't have the manpower with the equipment to go in, cut that, identify it, and replace it, and maintain, and keep going with everything we're doing. So we're gonna put. We still have a lot of residential service lines to identify, so we'll push that out a little while and revisit it. It may be something that we can identify a grant or something else for, and identify another method in doing that. So that's one of those challenges that are out there that we will continue to monitor and work toward completion. I will say, just in our update, we still haven't found a single lead service line in our system. So, and I would say I hate to guess, but I think we're 55 or 60% of the way through our system. So we still have a lot to do, but the good news is we haven't found any lead service lines yet. And then the only other update I'll give you, and you'll see this in your significant events for next month. We have a pipe that's internal to main pump station that's ductile iron that developed a crack in it. So we do have a small leak inside the station, not reportable or anything because it goes right back into the station, but it will continue to grow and cause problems later. So we were trying to identify a way to repair that crack, and in doing so, we have to isolate that area. So we turned the valve. We turned the valve and it closed as a test just to make sure it would isolate that line, which it did. As we were opening it, it broke open. So then we had to dig down to it and repair this valve. So the problem with the valve is the top of the valve sits about 6 feet deep, and the bottom of the valve is about another 5. So we're almost 10 feet deep, straight down beside the building. It's about 4 feet outside of the building. And there's a lot of electrical and other things that we've had to move and relocate to get to it. Obviously, we can't do that internally. We had to have a contractor. So we do have, and good news, there's no spill or anything like that. We still have to make the repair, but it's going to be much more expensive than we originally thought. So we're working through that right now. So if you see a bunch of crews out in front of the main pump station along the trail, that's what they're doing. And we do, just in case something does happen, to make the repair, we have to put the station in bypass. So the good news is if the valve completely fails, we do have pumps sitting there ready to go into bypass mode. But we would prefer not to do that until we absolutely have to. So, but that'll be a major repair that we have to make, and probably in this budget year. So I just wanted to share that with you. That'll probably be in your significant events report for next month.
Wally, was there a water line on Doris that?
I was just about to ask that.
It wasn't a water line, it was a sewer manhole, and it was, a brick manhole that was built in the late 60s maybe. I don't know, it's been there a long time. And the sewer is very shallow there. So I guess, over time the mortar just came out of the bricks and something drove over it, and the manhole ring and all collapsed into the manhole. So Well, the immediate repair we could do is go in there, clean it all out, remove the brakes, remove the lid and ring, and then we put a steel plate over top of it, which is the bump that everybody was complaining about. So we had to bridge it, and we have maybe closed today and tomorrow.
That's right.
And we have to replace that manhole. So that is not something that we can do internal. I mean, we could dig it up and we could set it, but it takes special tools to core the manhole and pull the pipes back into it. We don't have
Now,
those.
didn't y'all do something to it and then it failed or something?
We filled around it. It was starting to, I think it was starting to have a sinkhole on the outside, so we filled around it.
Right.
And we just didn't predict that since I've been here, we haven't had one that's actually collapsed like that.
Gotcha.
So, but yes, that's what happened. It was a manhole, sewer
Right.
manhole. So,
Response. It was really quick. They did a great job.
yeah, it happened during the weekend. I was actually out of town when I got the email or the text message. And then we also had, not quite as significant, but same day. So I think both of these happened on a Saturday. We had a main break in Rock Creek that took all of Rock Creek out of water.
Wow.
So we had a crew responding in Rock Creek, installing new water line for a short section, and then a crew responding to the manhole.
Dang.
So it was a busy Saturday.
Yeah.
You're not allowed to go out of town on weekends, right?
Oh, it's one of those that, I was coaching soccer, and one of the manager for my team actually lives in Rock Creek, and her husband was at home and sent her a text and said, "Why are we out of water? Did you pay the bill?" And she texted me and said, "Why are we out of water? I paid the bill." And I was literally in the middle of coaching. So at the end of the game, I texted TJ and he's like, "How'd you find out so quick?" So, word traveled faster than he could get it to me. Wow. Technology, right?
No, that's what we know why.
People like having.
So the great thing was he texted me a picture of our guys working, and so I just texted her. I said, "Here's why," and texted her the picture.
Yeah.
And she was like, "Well, that'll do it." So she was very happy. But so it's been an eventful month.
Yeah.
So
I got one more question. I'm
Sure.
sorry, guys. Listening to especially your great report, it just popped in my pea brain up here. Has anybody ever looked into solar for like power for the LTTS and all of that? Or what it would cost and if it was beneficial?
we have
Some
looked at it.
Stations.
It would not be beneficial as something that we could own because there is land out there. And there are challenges with selling it back to the grid and that kind of thing. We did at one point look at partnering with a company to where they would do the installation and the maintenance, the ongoing maintenance of those. And, we would partner in the sell back to the grid. And after they did the cost benefit analysis, it basically just didn't go anywhere. But we looked at that big tract of land that we have right near the lagoons. But it is done. There's a solar field right there
24.
on 24. So some of it, and I don't understand it completely, but I think some of it is based on where you're located. How easy is it to get it back on the grid? Because it has to be, it's easier in certain locations to get it back on the grid and that kind of stuff. So it has been looked at.
Okay, thank you.
It may be something we need to revisit in the future, but we at least have visited in the last 10 years.
Well, being that's on WASA, is it possible we could talk to WASA and ask if it's beneficial to them?
Well, it's where we were looking would be, we would use some power off of it and sell the rest back.
Yeah.
But it was actually, I think you meant Jones Onslow. It was Jones Onslow out there for the power.
For where the site is, out there on 24?
Oh, I don't
On
know.
WASA?
That's Banks. That is on
Duke did
Banks.
that. Duke Energy.
Yeah, that one's Duke. But out at LTS where we were looking, It's Jones Onslow. So they have transmission lines that go through there.
Solar farms.
Okay.
So,
Maybe
but we did.
Thinking somewhere else then.
Okay. So, well, the one here, the one in town is Duke, and it's
Right.
on its own base property.
I was talking about Hubert. Don't they have,
Oh, and Wassa does in Hubert.
don't they have solar out there?
I don't know. I can't answer that.
Well, okay.
I bet your son
No,
can
no,
know.
no, he can't, he don't work there no more.
He was there long enough.
What about the lagoons with the drought? Is that affecting us right now with the definitive?
Our lagoons are in very good shape. Our storage lagoons are in very good shape. We are in a drought, so it's a lot easier for us to irrigate in a drought. We can run longer days if we need to. One of the things that we track our flow to the LTS on a daily basis. Right now, we're running right around 4 million gallons a day because we're in a drought, which shows you that we have I&I. Yeah, so, and if you do the math on wet weather flow, we're about 30% higher than that, somewhere between 30 and 35% higher than that. So you could say that we could be running somewhere close to 30 to 35% I&I. Although, on top, if you look at when we expanded the plant, we were still around that same 5 to 5.4 number, which is why we expanded. Because at the time, our permit was 6 million gallons a day. Sorry, I should have said that, 5.4 million gallons a day, right? Not just 5.4, but so we were running right about between 5 and 5.4 million gallons a day, and our permit was at 6, so we had to expand. But we're still, even in wet weather flow, we're still seeing about those same numbers. As part of our special order by consent for sewer in the mid to late 2000s, we took efforts to reduce I&I, and the city invested, I want to say, somewhere close to about $5 million in I&I. I know we did one project that was $3 million, and then we did like 2 smaller projects right behind that. And those we had significant reductions. So I think some of what we're seeing, we're now 15 years past that. Some of what we're seeing is, we've had growth since then. Our wet weather flow really hasn't changed. So in making that investment in I&I think a lot of it, we still have I&I, don't get me wrong, but I think we reduced I&I, and some of that reduction, we actually grew in capacity. So I&I is something we're going to have to continue to chase. And we do have, one of the things that we're currently monitoring is sludge. We're trying to figure out, we have some changes in our irrigation lagoons with sludge. In 2017, I think, we went to blue frogs. And we haven't dredged, I think the last time we dredged it was in 2012 or 2014. We're supposed to dredge every 5 years. Well, we went to the blue frogs because they were saying that we would see natural digestion and we wouldn't have to dredge for a period of time, although we could never define what that period of time was. We're seeing some changes in our irrigation lagoons now. We don't know if it's, we're not sure what it is. We don't know if our sludge levels have increased and we're getting near a point where we'll have to dredge, or if we need to adjust our aeration process. So we're actually going through a small trial program now to see what works best. So if you're bored, you can come see our sludge tanks that we have at LTS, and and some of them we're feeding chemical, and some of them we're feeding extra air, and some of them we're leaving them just as they are to see what seems to work best. So we think what we did with Blue Frogs helped. Certainly we haven't dredged every 5 years, but we need another solution to go with that as well. So we're trying to identify what that solution would be.
Are you still operating the Blue Frog?
We do.
Oh.
We still run the Blue Frogs, yes, sir. And since one of the things we have tried is since the flow is down, because we're in a drought, we've actually isolated one of the lagoons, one of the aeration trains, and we're trying different things in that aeration train to see if it helps. So what I can say, if you go by there and look at it, that one looks really good where we've isolated. I mean, it's not quite as blue as the screen, but it's not a dark, murky water. It looks more like a detention pond than it does a wastewater lagoon. So we are trying different things there. So that is something that you may get a presentation, a more in-depth presentation after we get through some of our little trial period that we're working on.
Thank you. Next question.
Yeah. We're still operating them. We have a lot of challenges. And this is probably thanks to Sabrina's staff, whether she knows that they did it or not. We actually, we were noticing some changes, and we're having failures in some of our quite a bit of our Blue Frog equipment. And of course, it's a wastewater treatment plant, so it's harsh conditions. And what we're seeing is kind of gearbox failures and some body failures on those. And a gearbox can cost somewhere around $30,000. So we had multiple failures. Well, one of the things that we did is had Brandon do some research and call some of those places that we went and toured. And I couldn't remember exactly which ones we went to. So I gave him the general town area that we went, and he used Google and, Google Earth and looked at the different lagoons, and he found one that had actually gone away from the Blue Frogs. And they had pulled all their Blue Frogs and they were sitting up on a hill. So he called the plant operator and said, "Hey, I noticed you went away from Blue Frogs. Can you tell me why?" And, he quoted some of the stuff that we were seeing. There were some equipment failures. They had replaced some. But one of the things that they had was they had an air system fed through the lagoon that they had originally gone away from. And because something had failed and it hadn't been repaired, so they went to Blue Frog because it was cheaper than the repair. Well, they started having problems with the Blue Frog, and a new wastewater operator came in and said, "I think we should try repairing the system." So they went back to their old air system and pulled the Blue Frogs. Well, Brandon asked if he could buy the Blue Frogs off of them. So he bought, and I don't remember the number, but we bought about $9,000 worth of Blue Frogs. I think we ended up with, a dozen or more bodies, about 20 gearboxes, and some other things that we could use. And the total cost was like $9,000. So Sabrina's folks helped us get that purchase made, and we got it shipped up here. So we saved a ton of money. We have a bunch of redundant, additional parts if we run into problems. So, but those things, some of those are almost 10 years old now. So,
How many do we
that's
have
why you
out
see.
there?
We have 14 in each lagoon, so 14 times 3.
Thanks for that. Appreciate it, Wally. Thanks for the information. Does anyone else have any further questions, issues to discuss? Or anything else? No. All right. Well, our next meeting is scheduled for 5:30, Thursday, June 12th, 2025. I appreciate everybody coming, and meeting's adjourned.
Thank you.